I am Hannamari Jalovaara, and I curated the exhibition Transference, which incorporates the work of 5 Canada-based artists: Aimée Henny Brown, Saskia Jetten, Ross Kelly, Colin Lyons, and Kathleen Ritter. Each of the participating artists' practice involves print media either materially or conceptually. Although many people are familiar with printmaking as a way to produce multiples or create an edition, printmaking actually really means to transfer image or information from a matrix to another substrate, such as paper. Now, the matrix comes from the Latin word mother, and it denotes the stone or metal plate or the surface into which an image or information is inscribed. While contemplating different possible characteristics of printmaking, I thought about the matrix, ink, pressure, process, reveal, and transformation. And in the end, I chose the concept of transfer. As an artist whose practice includes print media, I am very interested in the continuing and evolving conversation regarding what constitutes contemporary print.
Hi, my name is Aimée Henny Brown, and I'm an artist who lives and works in Vancouver, BC. And in the show Transference, the piece that I have made is called Futur Proche, Monument, Refuge, and Prospect. It's a video piece that is made from collages that have been brought through an extraordinary process so that they can be animated and set to time. So the process for Futur Proche starts from a really analog, handmade process where I'm cutting material that's originally sourced, printed matter. So I'm looking really closely at the printed dot, the CMYK 4-color dot in my printed matter, to try and match up different cuts and essentially create a new puzzle that's never existed before. Once I find those compositions, I've been looking for ways to take collage out of its original medium and push it forward so that it's still talking about printed matter and has a conversation and a dialogue with printmaking, but that it's also embracing ideas of time. A lot of the printed matter that I choose to make collages from has a sense of nostalgia or history about it because it was printed 30, 40, sometimes 50 years ago. So what I'm trying to do by taking the collages through an animation process is to actually bring that historical material into a more contemporary lens so that we can look at it with a fresh eyes and fresh voice. So with the source material that I'm working from, there are a couple of different things in particular that I'm looking for, especially within this project. So with the ideas of monument, prospect, and refuge, I'm thinking about past ideas of the future, which is a really unique way of building work because you're looking through the lens of what has happened with a projection of what would have been essentially now. There's a quote that I like to think about when I'm making these works and thinking about ideas of vast landscape or future shelters or modes of transportation. And it's that nothing looks so old as ideas of the future from the past. And this is something that I really try to keep in mind when I'm building the theme work of Futur Proche. I'm building these scrolls so that they mimic compositions similar to traditional landscape scrolls. So there's sections within each of the scrolls which lent really well to the projection. We're almost looking at moving vignettes. But what's also been really helpful is keeping in mind this idea of an apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic landscape, what the idea of new ruins might be if we take images of buildings that we've documented from our past and our present, what that might look like in the future. So there's a constant oscillation between looking at printed matter from the past and projections into different stages of what the future might be or might hold.
So my name is Saskia Jetten, and I'm from the Netherlands originally. I immigrated 5 years ago, and I live currently in the Fraser Valley, where I run my print studio. I have presses there, and I make my drawings and my prints over there. When I'm drawing, I feel like I'm in that world, but it's on a flat surface. I can't get literally into it. So I need to make that world around me, so that's why I developed it into the third dimension, but that's not enough. I want to see it move, and so it's literally a moving image, actually, the stop motion animation. Then I can transfer, or transfer my ideas to the public, and I can tell them, look, this is what I made, this is my world. And as a kid, I always said I want to make things, because I just don't feel happy when I show a piece of paper and I tell them, well, this is my paper I wrote, I need to show a piece. So that's why I'm making what I'm making. I love theater and I love people. That's actually the main thing what my work is about, and it's already for more than 25 years. And I'm fascinated by where people play a role and where they try to be genuine, and where do we think as an audience or as the person, him or herself, that you are genuine or you are wearing a mask. Like, for instance, before the recording of this interview, I thought, okay, what do I wear? Do I am the artist, or do I am Saskia, or do I am the daughter of my parents, or the sister of my sister? And how do I, what do I wear? What is part of that role? How do I look like? And other people might say, oh, you're definitely looking like an artist. Well, I think, no, I'm just, I look like I'm a gardener, for instance. So that play, I also like to watch people when I'm drinking coffee, or when I'm in the theater, to see or to try to find out, are they playing a role or not, and what does it tell about them? So my work is mainly about that, and about the difficulty of showing your genuineness, because I think myself it's easier to wear that mask and hide behind that mask, and to show your genuineness, how does it look like actually? So the vulnerability of it, and also the playfulness, are all integrated in my work.
So my name is Ross Kelly. I'm a visual artist. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, and I work mostly in photography and with photo-based works and works that deal with issues in photography. I have two works in the exhibition. The Threshold of Vision as an Operation of Thought, which is a series of casts made from photographic surfaces. And the second work is But the Things Which Are Not Seen Are Eternal. And it is a series of photograph albums, old photograph albums, which have been rubbed with graphite pencils and pastels, and then reassembled to resemble the original object. I mean, with casting, you're really draining a lot of the information out of there, because what you see is there's no detail, or there's very little detail. With rubbing, you're actually actively making marks on the surface. So you're putting something of yourself, onto that surface, which is interesting because, part of this idea of photographic space, which I like to talk about, is it's partially the photograph itself, but also our minds. What that when we encounter a photograph, we're encountering information. We're encountering information, and we make of that what we will. We see what we see, but also we bring our own histories and our own memories, and how we feel that day. And it sort of opens up this this space which we then inhabit, and the marks that are made when you're rubbing something are sort of a hint that actually you're part of the process, that you're part of what is what is being discussed, I suppose. When you transfer something, information is sent from one point to another, but more often than not, some information is lost in that transfer. And I often think that what's not there, what's missing, what's been lost, is more interesting than what you can see. It's sort of another way of thinking about what you're seeing. And certainly in casting, for instance, a lot of information is lost. The entire image is essentially lost. But what's left behind is quite revealing. I think it's also interesting. How would I put it? There's a term in physics called the observer effect, where by observing something, you change it. And with the rubbings, or with the casts, I think there's something like that going on. Through interpreting what we're looking at, we're transferring something of ourselves onto that surface. So there's sort of a two-part transference going on. There's a transference of information to us, but then we're also transferring something of ourselves back. And that's the equation that happens when we look at a work or a piece of art.
So my name is Colin Lyons, and I'm currently based in Binghamton, New York, although the project that I have here was done when I was living in Iowa City, Iowa. The work that I make is a combination of printmaking, site-specific installation, and chemical experiments. So the work that I have in the gallery right now is titled Contingency Plan. And this project really started with an interest in a project that was done by Planktos Inc. and the community at Haida Gwaii that was an iron fertilization experiment in 2010. And it was an attempt to simultaneously boost the local fishery, but also to try to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And effectively, the idea was to dump a very large quantity of iron sulfate into the ocean in an attempt to create an artificial plankton bloom. Fast forwarding to last year, I spent the year living in Iowa City, Iowa, doing a fellowship at the University of Iowa. And I became very interested in a site that the locals call Mount Trashmore, which is in Cedar Rapids. It's the Cedar Rapids dump. In 2008, Cedar Rapids was hit by one of the worst floods in North American history. I mean, there's a lot of talk at this point about how climate change is affecting weather patterns and how these kind of catastrophic events are quite directly related to the effects of climate change. And so I designed a project that would be effectively a historic monument that encapsulates all of that buried history for that site, but that also doubles as a kind of contingency pod, a kind of geoengineering prototype to release iron sulfate into the river upon the event of the next 1,000-year flood. And so creating a project that is in some ways satirical in dealing with climate change and dealing with catastrophe planning. In some ways, what I'm presenting here at the gallery is it's a very straightforward project. There's an etched map in which I've very carefully tried to present the topology of the location in an extremely traditional, almost historic sense. Beyond that, I've created a brochure which was actually given out to the people of Cedar Rapids and is done as a silkscreen using ferric chloride and iron sulfate as my pigments. And the final component, which is the main component of this installation here, is a chemical prototype where I use this to actually test out the chemicals, test out the reactions in real time. I'm basically taking the industrial debris from the meatpacking plant, which has since been demolished, and dissolving them in sulfuric acid and in hydrochloric acid to make the chemicals that are typically used in these geoengineering experiments. And so what you're seeing in the gallery is the creation of the waste product, but the waste product being actually the final useful product for this project. What we'll have at the end is a usable quantity of iron sulfate, which will theoretically be end up in the Cedar River one day.
My name is Kathleen Ritter. I'm based in Paris, but I lived in Vancouver for many years. My practice goes across many different kinds of media, and I'm really interested in ideas of invisibility and gender. And I would say that my approach to my practice is around a number of intellectual and material investigations. This body of work is inspired by my reading of Mina Loy. Mina Loy was a poet, artist, inventor, feminist in the early part of the 20th century who's not very well known. She was born in London, but lived in Florence and Paris and New York and moved around with the Futurists and the Dadaists. And a lot of her writing was a feminist response to Futurism. And I was very interested in her work because of its humor, because of its intelligence, and because it's a response to a history that I've known entirely as a male history. And so she represents an interesting alternative voice to that. With this work, I took Mina Loy's original manuscript from The Sacred Prostitute. And when I was looking at it, I noticed all these dots and dashes and extraneous punctuation, and I decided to isolate those. So I erased all of the characters and just left the dots and the dashes and the punctuation. And when I lined all of those sheets up of the manuscript, it looked to me like a player piano roll, you know, one of those old rolls that would just automatically play the piano. And I had the idea to translate that into music. So I worked with a composer to isolate all of these dots and dashes and to turn that into a MIDI file that could then be played out in musical form. And that's what you hear in the exhibition. The prints are based on the original manuscript that Mina Loy wrote for The Sacred Prostitute. And what I did is I wanted to reproduce the manuscript as I was seeing it, so with the dots and the dashes highlighted, but I still wanted to have the image of the manuscript itself. So I worked with a particular kind of paper. It's a Japanese paper from Awagami called Bunkowski. It's very similar to the original typewriter paper in that it's strong, but it's still a bit transparent. And I worked with a printer in Paris to take the manuscript text and to print it on the reverse side of the paper so that you could just see the image of the manuscript kind of ghosting through. And I like this term ghosting. It's a term that's used in print and design and in bookmaking, often for an error where ink might bleed through to the other side of the page and you get a ghosted image. And I thought about this idea of ghosting as kind of very parallel to Mina Loy herself, who remains this kind of ghost in the 20th century since so much of her work was unpublished. And then on the front of the paper, I literally held it up to the window and went through and in pencil traced out all of the dots and dashes. And that's what represents the score. When I think about this work in the context of this exhibition, I return to the title itself and this great word, transference. Transference, the etymology of it, is from two Latin words, trans, meaning across, and ference comes from fere, which is a verb to carry. So I think of many of the works in this exhibition as carrying something across. And in my case, I think that this particular body of work is carrying across a story from a historical moment to the present. But it also carries across a number of material processes that are perhaps hidden, perhaps not entirely evident, that is very much tied to printmaking and to many of the kind of indirect processes that are involved in printmaking.
Contemporary print is attracting a lot of conversation and a lot of research at the moment in forms of international symposia and conferences. It is very exciting to have the opportunity to showcase all of this diverse work in Richmond Art Gallery and have the ability to bring together the different approaches that the artists have had to the theme and to contemporary print in Canada. With the new technologies and with print media's ability to include other media such as installation, sculpture, or animation, as well as its ability to cross over into other media, the question, what is the essence of print, is increasingly intriguing.